It arrived quietly. No one saw who delivered it. No staff recalled placing it on the shelf. It was just there one Monday morning, nestled between two outdated anthologies on the new arrivals cart in the corner of the West Ridge Middle School library. The cover was black, with no title or author. The spine was blank. Thin silver lines webbed across its surface, like veins beneath skin. When the librarian, Miss Crawl, picked it up, the binding was ice cold. She checked for a barcode, but there wasn't one. Still, it had a library sticker, a checkout card, and a stamp from the school West Ridge MS. Assuming it had been added by a student or part of a misprocessed donation, she shelved it without further thought. 2 days later, a 7th grade girl named Lydia Fenn checked it out. She was quiet, always reading something, often sitting under the wide arched window on the east side of the library. That day, she opened the black book and began reading immediately. She didn't move for the entire lunch period. When her friend Macy asked what it was about, Lydia looked confused. She said the story didn't seem to follow any genre. It kept shifting. One moment, it was a fantasy story, then a crime thriller, then something like a diary. "I think it knows I'm reading it," she said. "It keeps changing, like it's watching me." By the next day, Lydia had changed. She wasn't talking, not to teachers, not to Macy. She carried the book around, even though her time with it had expired. She wouldn't let it out of her hands. When asked about it, she would simply shake her head. During science class, she began writing in her notebook, except it wasn't class notes. The teacher, Mr. Hemmings, saw symbols, tight loops of characters he couldn't identify. At first, he thought it was another language. Later, he admitted they looked more like an alphabet from a dream. On Friday morning, Lydia was gone. Her bed was untouched. No signs of struggle. The back door was still locked from the inside. Her parents found her phone on the floor beside her bed, and the black book lying on the pillow, closed. Her disappearance made a local news. The police interviewed classmates, but most had little to offer. Only Macy mentioned the book. When officers checked the school library, it was no longer on the shelf. Miss Crawl swore she had never seen it. 3 weeks passed. Then it reappeared, this time in the hands of another student, Nolan Pierce. He said he found it sitting on top of his locker. No note, no one around. He brought it home that night and read almost half of it in one sitting. His version of the book told a story about a boy with no reflection. He couldn't stop reading, even when the words began to blur and shift. Over the next week, Nolan suffered from severe migraines and night terrors. He woke screaming, claiming that the book was in the walls. On the 7th night, he stopped speaking altogether. Doctors said it was psychological trauma. The school finally took action. Principal Reese told the staff to confiscate the book if they ever saw it again. When it turned up in a first-grade classroom inside a student's backpack, they sealed it in a plastic bin and placed it in the office's locked supply room. It was gone the next morning. From there, the pattern grew. The book would vanish and return, always to a student, never to the same place twice. Some found it under their desks, others in their lockers. One claimed it was waiting in their backpack when they hadn't packed it. Each time, the story was different. Every reader described something uniquely tailored. One read about a girl who dreamed too much. Another about a school that looped the same day endlessly. A third about a child who saw static when they closed their eyes. Every reader changed afterward. Some developed nervous tics. Others withdrew completely. One tried to destroy the book by tearing the pages out and setting them on fire. They burned, but only the flames remained. The book itself reappeared on her bookshelf 2 days later, whole and unharmed. That student dropped out the following month. No adult could remember adding the book to the system. The barcode didn't scan. When librarians tried to log it, the screen would freeze or flash with a strange error message. Input exceeds frame. Eventually, the school went further. A private company was hired to purge the archives. They scanned every physical volume. No black book was found. Still, the students whispered about it. They claimed it moved between classes, that it could only be seen if you already believed in it. Years passed. Then came Jamie Moss. She was a senior at the time, working on an independent study about psychological horror in literature. Curious about the rumors, she asked old staff, read local forums, and tracked down alumni. Most wouldn't speak to her. The ones who did gave vague answers. But one former librarian, long retired, sent her a single email that said, "It doesn't want to be found, unless it wants you." The next week, Jamie found the book sitting on her desk. She recorded her findings in a spiral-bound journal. She read it in a locked room under camera. She documented every page. She claimed the story started as a collection of unfinished diary entries. Then it began referencing her name, her handwriting, her dreams. The final entry in her journal read, "It has a last page. I'm going to read it. If I don't come back, destroy this." Jamie never returned to school. Her dorm room was empty. No signs of struggle. Just her journal land, the black book, resting on her pillow. The school shut the case. It wasn't mentioned at graduation, but students say it's still out there. Sometimes in the library, sometimes in a lost found box. One boy said he saw it in the nurse's office, sitting on a table with no other books around. Another swore it was hidden between 2 lockers on the 2nd floor. They say it waits. It doesn't just tell a story. It finishes yours. Mr. Sunder was the kind of teacher kids liked to talk about, but never mock. He was tall, well-read, and dressed like an English professor, complete with elbow-patched jackets and wire-rimmed glasses. His classroom was lined with old books, quotes from obscure authors, and strange vintage posters that looked like they were pulled from forgotten museums. He taught creative writing to the 8th graders at Westcott Middle School. On the first Monday of October, he wrote a prompt on the board in pale yellow chalk. Write the worst nightmare you've ever had. Use ink, no pencils. He handed out off-white paper and basic black ballpoint pens, saying nothing else. No rubrics, no examples, just the sentence. The class was unusually quiet. Even the loud kids didn't argue. They just stared at the page and slowly began to write. Some hesitated. Others dove right in. The room grew strangely still. The fluorescent lights overhead gave a soft hum, but even that seemed to fade after a while. The air in the room felt thicker, like someone had closed an invisible door behind them. Casey Lindstrom was the first to finish. She had always been quiet and artistic, known for her drawings and her shyness. Her nightmare was about her mother standing in the doorway, completely silent, with no mouth. The skin stretched where her lips should have been. Casey said it came from a dream she'd had repeatedly as a child. The next day, Casey was absent. When she returned, she wasn't the same. She sat with her head down and refused to talk. Word spread that her mother had suffered a massive stroke that morning. She had survived, but couldn't speak anymore. Not a word. Casey stopped drawing after that. At first, no one thought about the assignment. Not until more students began to suffer similar experiences. Brian Kessler wrote about a dream in which he drowned while the teacher called roll. Every time his name echoed in the room, water filled his lungs. He described a classroom submerged in darkness, filled with whispers and pressure. 2 days after handing it in, Brian collapsed during morning attendance. He clawed at his throat and couldn't breathe. The nurse said there was no medical reason for it. He had panic attacks every time someone called his name. He left the school by the end of the week. After that, parents started asking questions. Mr. Sunder said little. He claimed the assignment was meant to explore fear as a narrative tool. He offered no explanation when pressed by the administration, simply stating that his students were more honest than usual. Then came Aaliyah Granger. Aaliyah was not popular, not loud, not forgettable. She was the kind of student teachers adored, brilliant, curious, a bit strange. Her stories always went further than the others. She didn't just write stories. She built worlds. She turned in her nightmare on a folded piece of paper. On the front, in small, capital letters, it read, "The class that vanished." No one ever read what was inside. Not even Mr. Sunder. Some say. That night, 7 students didn't go home. Their desks were still full. Jackets draped over chairs. Lunchboxes packed. One still had a math quiz half finished on the surface. But the students, gone. No security footage showed them leaving. No calls were made to the office. No one noticed until the final bell rang and parents began to call, wondering where their children were. The school went into lockdown. Police were called. The press arrived. The story hit local news under the title, "The 7 from Room 214. Investigations found nothing." There were no footprints, no signs of abduction, no ransom notes. The cameras on the hallway glitched between periods. Every angle showed nothing but empty halls and flickering lights. Mr. Sunder was placed on leave. He did not return the following semester. Some say he disappeared too. Others claim he mailed a single envelope to the district office before vanishing. The envelope contained only one thing: the nightmare prompt, rewritten in black ink. After that, the school banned personal writing assignments. Anything remotely resembling psychological exploration was off the table. Teachers were told to avoid imaginative, trauma-based content. Students were not to be exposed to nightmares, real or fictional. But something had already shifted. Whispers traveled among student stories that the ink itself had been cursed. That whatever they wrote didn't just express the nightmare, it invited it in. A custodian named Mr. Reyes found a stack of the nightmare pages weeks later. They had been shoved into the back of a file drawer in the supply room. Most were faded, unreadable, warped by moisture. But one stood out. The page looked brand new. It had no title. The ink was fresh and sharp. The message read, "They are written now. You cannot erase ink." Reyes tried to destroy the paper. He burned it in the incinerator behind the gym. But afterward, he found a black smudge on his locker every morning for 3 weeks. No matter how often he cleaned it, it came back. Then Eliza Tran found a page in her locker. It was folded into a tight square. The paper was thick, almost like parchment. She opened it and found a message written in cursive. "We are still here. You wrote us. Now finish what you started." Eliza didn't understand. She hadn't been in Mr. Sunder's class. She hadn't written a nightmare. But later that day, she caught sight of something in her classroom, an extra desk in the back corner, occupied. A boy she didn't recognize sat perfectly still, pale skin, dark eyes. He wore the old school uniform style from before the dress code changed. No one else noticed him. When she blinked, he was gone. She mentioned it to a friend. The next morning, Eliza's name was missing from the attendance list. Her desk was empty, locker untouched, books still in place. When her parents arrived, the school said no one by that name was enrolled. But someone keeps finding black ink smudges near locker 314, and every few weeks, a folded page appears in the lost stand found. It always says the same thing: write what you fear most. Use ink. There was a room in the old wing of Westcott Middle School that no one talked about anymore. It was officially labeled Supplemental Reading Room beyond the building plan, but students called it something else: the Silent Room. It had no windows, no decorations. The paint was a sickly yellow beige that absorbed the light from the single overhead fixture. The air smelled like old paper and something faintly sweet, like rotting flowers. The only sound was the tick of a clock on the wall, and even that stopped sometimes. Years ago, the room was used for students who needed quiet space to read or catch up on work. It was tucked at the far end of the east corridor, next to the boiler room and across from a locked storage closet no one had the key to. There were no security cameras in that hallway, no intercom speaker inside the room. Once the heavy wooden door shut, it was just you and the silence. For a while, it was seen as a privilege. Students requested time in the room to escape loud classmates. Teachers used it as a reward for focus and good behavior. But things changed after a student named Daniel Morrow spent too long inside. He was a top student, respectful, quiet, never got in trouble. One day, his teacher gave him a pass to spend the last period in the reading room. He was studying for an exam and said he needed space to concentrate. He entered at 1:14 p.m. When the bell rang at 2:30, he didn't come out. A custodian found him still sitting at the small desk, staring at the wall. When asked what he was doing, Daniel just blinked and said, "I was waiting." Waiting for what? He didn't seem to know. When they asked his name, he hesitated. David, then no. I think I forgot. He couldn't remember who he was. Not just his name, his schedule, his teachers, his locker combination. Even his parents' names were gone. The only thing he could remember clearly was sitting in the room and listening to the silence. He was taken to the nurse, then to a specialist. Over time, most of his memory returned, but something about him never came back. He refused to read, refused to sit in quiet spaces, refused to be alone. After the incident, the school stopped using the reading room. They blamed Daniel's episode on anxiety, said it was academic pressure, a coincidence. But then another student, Tasha Yi, claimed to have heard voices in the quiet when walking past the room. She said the door was closed, but she could hear breathing from the other side. Breathing that didn't match human rhythm. She said it sounded like a heart trying to learn how to beat. Later that month, a sub forgot the reading room was off-limit and sent a student there during testing. He returned 20 minutes later and asked the teacher what year it was. That was the last straw. The administration sealed the room, locked it from the outside, posted a notice about asbestos risks. They moved the supplemental reading program to the computer lab. But the door, it kept opening. Custodians found it ajar on Monday mornings. Staff claimed they'd shut and locked it on Friday. No signs of forced entry. Nothing stolen. Just that thick smell in the air and the quiet tick of the stopped clock. No one could explain why it still ran with no batteries. The room became legend. Students dared each other to touch the doorknob. Some said, if you knocked twice and whispered your name, you'd hear someone else whisper it back only. It wasn't your voice. Years later, after a school renovation, the wing was scheduled to be demolished. The reading room was on the list for complete removal. Walls knocked down. Foundations replaced. On the morning of demolition, workers found the door wide open. Inside, there was no dust, no mold. The clock still sat on the wall, frozen at 1:14 p.m. And in the center of the desk, they found a single index card. Said, "We forget, so you don't have to. Let the silence hold you. Let the silence know you." No one claimed responsibility. The card wasn't from any known book or school resource. It was kept in a locked office for record purposes and quietly forgotten. But some say that when you're alone in the new school library, especially after hours, you can still feel a chill from the east wall. And if you sit quietly long enough, you'll hear it. Not a voice, not breathing, just the absence of everything, waiting to remember you.